man who mysteriously brought tragedy, not once, but twice, to his own family.
He previously served time for the murder of his first wife, Tanya. That was back in 1991.
His wife wrote a book to warn people about monsters like him.
Accused of killing 4 children and torturing his wife. Today, Gregory Green faced a judge for the first time.
Gregory was born on December 10th, 1966, to his mother, Tommy Lee Green. He had some brothers and sisters, and they were a religious bunch, always going to church together. Now, things took a weird turn when Gregory hit his early 20s. He met a woman named Tanya Clayton Green, who had 2 kids from a previous relationship. They got married, and good news hit in 1991. Tanya was pregnant. However, within 6 months, something changed in Gregory. Maybe something happened to him, or maybe he was just a not-so-great person. The details about his early life are kind of unknown, but what we do know is that the guy who seemed pretty normal turned into someone evil, or even a monster. Things started getting weirder when Greg began acting mean, bossy, and angry toward Tanya. She called a friend because she suspected Greg was acting weird, as if he was on drugs. Then suddenly, he just changed. Tanya had enough of his behavior. She decided to leave. She planned to go to church, offer a prayer, come back home, pack her stuff, and leave. But when she got back, Greg was there waiting, and he was furious. He probably knew she wanted to leave. Tensions escalated, and Greg snapped, stabbing his wife multiple times in the face, chest, and back, resulting in the tragic deaths of both her and their unborn child. During this distressing incident, Tanya's children were reportedly hiding in a closet. Fortunately, they were unharmed. The strangest thing was that he called 911 and told them that he killed his wife and unborn child and was waiting for the cops in the house. Soon, the police arrived, and he was immediately arrested. In 1992, he pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. Greg tried to say he wasn't in control of his actions and used the insanity defense. The state checked his mental health and found him mentally competent. He was then convicted and got a 15 to 25-year sentence. Surprisingly, Greg's mother wrote to the judge in 1992, saying she didn't think Greg was a threat to society. She believed a long sentence wouldn't make him any better, claiming he had suffered enough and would keep suffering. In prison, Greg tried to get parole 5 times. The first 4 times, he got denied, twice in 2004 and twice in 2006. The parole board in 2004 said Greg showed little emotion or remorse and lacked empathy. Greg even started blaming Tanya for her death. By late 2006, he changed his tune, blaming his past immaturity for his actions. Quite a shift. He wanted out and had support, especially from his sister, Deidre Broders, who wrote in 2006 that Greg had become closer to the Lord and read the Bible daily, believing it helped him through tough times. It was a surprising twist in the story. One of Greg's biggest supporters at the time was Pastor Fred Harris from Detroit. Fred and Greg were friends, and Fred wanted to help him find the right path. In a letter to the Michigan Parole Board in 2005, Fred said he knew Greg before everything went wrong and that Greg was part of their church. He offered the church's support and his own to help Greg in any way possible. Fred felt Greg had paid for his mistakes, acknowledged the damage caused, and believed Greg was genuinely sorry. Fred hoped to assist Greg in turning his life around, helping others through church work both in the USA and in other countries. He understood this wouldn't bring back the lives lost, but it was a way for Greg to give back. Fred wrote again in 2006, expressing that Greg was a faithful churchgoer before prison, showing interest in the Lord. He mentioned their communication with Greg over the years and highlighted a technique called inner healing and deliverance they used in their ministry, which seemed to bring positive changes in Greg. However, as we'll soon see, this support from Fred would later become a regrettable decision. Fred assured the board that if Greg were released, he'd be welcomed into their church community and they'd do whatever they could to help him adjust. To ensure his release, Greg convincingly portrayed himself as a changed man. Remarkably, he managed to behave well and adhere to the rules. He engaged in just one minor scuffle, avoided any serious violence, and did not challenge the authorities. As a result, after serving only 16 years for the heinous act of murdering his pregnant wife, Greg was granted parole in 2008. During his 2 years on parole, Greg had regular check-ins with an officer, but otherwise maintained a low profile. He moved in with his mother, kept quiet, and stayed out of trouble. After those 2 years, his parole concluded, and he was officially a free man. It's unsettling to think that just 18 years after committing such a horrendous act, he was completely free. During this period, Greg seemingly reformed, falling in love again with none other than his friend pastor's daughter, Faith Harris. Faith believed Greg had genuinely changed for the better. Previously, she had been involved with Chadney Allen Sr., with whom she had 2 children. After his parole ended, Faith and Greg quickly married in December 2010. Within about 2 years, they had 2 more girls, Coy and Kaylee. Everything seemed fine. Greg's old problems seemed to disappear. But around 3 years into the marriage, in 2013, things took a turn. Greg suddenly became enraged and violent, acting controlling and jealous towards Faith. Out of nowhere, he started threatening and behaving aggressively. Faith had enough and filed a restraining order against Greg. In her application, she mentioned filing for a divorce because he was being belligerent, kicking things, and making threats. The situation got scary, with Greg even jumping at her like he was going to attack. Shockingly, the restraining order was denied due to insufficient evidence. It's hard to believe, considering Greg's troubled past. In late 2013, Faith filed for divorce, but the paperwork didn't go through. It's unclear what happened, but it seems Greg might have promised to change. Unfortunately, he didn't, and about 3 years later, in August 2016, Faith filed for divorce for the 3rd time. 1 month later, on September 21st, Greg did something unimaginable in the middle of the night. He attached a plastic tube to the back of his car and poisoned his 2 youngest kids, 5-year-old Coy and 4-year-old Kaylee. He used a hose that went from the car's tailpipe to their bedroom. After doing this, he woke up Faith and tied her up with duct tape and zip ties, putting her in the basement. He shot her in the foot and cut her face with a box cutter, but she survived. Then, Greg brought Faith's older kids, 19-year-old Chadney and 17-year-old Kiara, into the basement and shot them both while Faith watched. Around 1:15 in the morning on September 22nd, Greg called 911 and waited in his driveway. This awful situation is shockingly similar to what happened in Greg's first marriage. First responders came to an awful scene, arrested Greg, and took Faith to the hospital. Thankfully, she eventually recovered from her injuries.
The one thing that I didn't realize at the time that I found out after is when you're preparing to leave, that's the most dangerous time, which I knew I didn't even know, and in my mind, I'm just like, well, I'm just preparing. I just want to save money so I can just, get my kids out of there and just get our own place. But, I didn't know his mindset,
On February 15th, Green admitted to committing 4 second-degree murders. Additionally, he pleaded guilty to torture, assault with intent to cause serious harm, and having a firearm during the events at the family's home in Dearborn Heights. Before Greg was sentenced, Faith was allowed to speak, and some of the things she said were heartbreaking.
The loss to me is so big that I will never truly recover for the rest of my life. I will be forever in pain and heartbreak. I would like to thank the court and you, Your Honor, for the time you have allowed me to speak. I would like to thank the prosecutor's office and staff and all the police officers who helped in this case.
Faith thanked the court, the prosecutor's office, and the police officers involved in the case. In closing, she recommended a life sentence without the chance of parole for Greg. It's heartbreaking to hear Faith's pain and the devastating impact on her and her family. Losing 4 children and enduring such a traumatic experience is unimaginable. Before sentencing Green, he was allowed to speak some words.
Mr. Green, is that time and date set for sentencing? Is there anything you'd like to say on your own behalf, sir?
I just want to say, well, first of all, congrats, and only he can judge. I do regret, and I'm sorry for what has happened. All I've ever wanted was a God-fearing, helpmate that would support me and be faithful, no matter what.
Green is sentenced to 45 to 100 years in prison for the murders and an extra 2 years for having a firearm. He will serve the 2-year firearm sentence first, making him eligible for parole at the age of 97. His lawyer, Charles Longstreet II, mentioned that Green feels sorry for what he did.
Look at you when you appear utterly unmoved by everything that she said. Your actions are inconceivable and beyond understanding. I hope that the families affected by this tragedy can heal. As a practical matter, this court is confident that if I follow the sentence agreement in this case, you will never be released from prison.
His initial sentencing was shockingly lenient. He should have been given a true life sentence without the possibility of parole. As for Gregory Green,
You're going to be sentenced to 45 to 100 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. Count 6 to 10 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. All will be consecutive or concurrent with one another and consecutive to count 10 for the felony firearm, which will be 2 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. You will receive credit for 161 days. You must pay $476 in state costs, crime victims assessment in the amount of $130, court costs in the amount of $1,300, attorney's fees in the amount of $400, and a $60 DNA fee. Since this was a conviction by plea, you can file an application for leave to appeal the conviction and sentence with the Court of Appeals. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you, and that request needs to be made within the next 42 days.
prison isn't enough for what he's done. He got away with murder the first time and should have never been let out. The justice system has faced significant criticism for its handling of this case. We hope that he remains incarcerated to prevent any further harm. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for more chilling true crime mysteries. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and as always, seek the truth.